Hi there, everyone. My name's Ben. I'm a Cryptoeconomic specialist, so I run a token design agency called Token Architecture. We design token economies for clients and businesses. And then we also have a research and analytics provider called Just Cryptoeconomics, where we deconstruct how tokens work, what they do, what their functionalities are, and ultimately how they accrue value. So today I'm going to be talking to you about cryptoeconomic lessons for real-world asset projects. So here's the topics we're going to try and cover today. 15 minutes is not a long time to cover a pretty in-depth subject. So we're going to start off with a brief definition of cryptoeconomics, what involves its scope and its breadth. Then we'll look at real-world asset projects, so what actually constitutes a real-world asset project. We'll then look at where cryptoeconomics fits in the stack of an RWA project, why it matters. We'll then look at the relevant token functionalities that we often see in these businesses and these projects. So what types of token functionalities actually make sense, which ones result in value accrual, and which of those generally make less sense. Then we'll look at value accrual more generally, both in the context of tokens and how that maps up against equity. We'll talk about liquidity briefly. We'll then take some key points around governance, and then some final other cryptoeconomic tools that are relevant to these types of projects. So let's start off by defining what we're talking about with cryptoeconomics. So cryptoeconomics is an interdisciplinary field at the intersection of economics and finance, and it relates to the use of incentive structures to align individual actions with the goals of broader systems. And it does all of this, in theory, without the use of central intermediaries. We don't have enough time today to cover the entire scope of cryptoeconomics, so I'll focus on those aspects that are most relevant to real-world asset projects. So those would be token functionality, value accrual, governance, security incentives, and market forces. Other components that we won't cover today include supply models, reward logic, allocation and distribution decisions, networking community, technological considerations, token investment analysis. There's a whole range of components under cryptoeconomics, but this is what we'll be focusing on today. A long way of saying that cryptoeconomics is not merely tokenomics. It spans game theory, mechanism design, as well as many other disciplines. So with that said, let's look at RWAs. So what is an RWA project? I'm going to attempt to provide a definition. You won't necessarily find a standard definition in this industry, but in our opinion, it's a real-world asset project where you're connecting assets from the real world to an on-chain or a blockchain-based environment, along with their economic rights. It's a very broad sector in the industry, so it can include everything from real estate and land rights to infrastructure, commodities, natural resource rights, financial instruments, whether that's equities or bonds, IP, royalty streams from created assets, tangible goods, collectibles, environmental credits, whether that's carbon credits or biodiversity credits. So it's an incredibly broad swathe of projects we're talking about here. And a good litmus test is, does the asset have some kind of off-chain cash flow or some kind of other relevant economic value, as well as some kind of legal bridge to the token or set of tokens and the broader kind of on-chain environment on which it operates. So where does cryptoeconomics fit in this stack? So first we have the asset layer. So these are the off-chain assets. They're generating some kind of cash flow. This is the base of the stack. It could be rent from property, interest from loans, royalties, or otherwise. We then have the legal layer. So there's some kind of off-chain entity, whether that's a special purpose vehicle or a trust or some other entity, and that often holds the assets and also grants enforceable rights. We then have the token layer. So this could be an asset ownership token, where you have a token representing an off-chain asset. It could be a native token issued by a business or a protocol that has perhaps governance rights or service provision rights, or it could be some kind of payment mechanism, such as a stablecoin. So this is where the token or tokens exist, along with any other relevant economic logic in the smart contracts. And then finally, we have the market layer. So this is where the tokens are issued, traded, and priced. And I would just kind of iterate here that your on-chain rights only matter if they can actually be upheld in the off-chain vehicle to which they're connected. So why does cryptoeconomic design matter for these types of projects? So 3 points I kind of want to hit today. So first of all, behavior. So cryptoeconomics involves tokens, but it involves any kind of economic lever or tool that you can exercise as a designer. And so we can encourage certain types of behavior or discourage other types of behavior. So for instance, if you have a lending DeFi protocol, and you're using real-world assets as collateral, then you might use oracles and other cryptoeconomic mechanisms to adjust collateral ratios based on asset health. So we're encouraging or discouraging certain types of behavior. Efficiency, if we can embed cash flow rules and other economic rules into smart contracts, then in theory, at least, we can replace some manual middle office work, reducing costs overall. And then third and finally, there's some research showing that fractional tokens of real-world assets trade at a much higher turnover than the underlying assets. So we have liquidity advantages as well. Oops, the slide doesn't appear properly there. Apologies. Okay, briefly, we're going to look at some of the token functionalities that are relevant to these types of projects. So this comes from our in-house token functionality framework from Just Cryptoeconomics. So I'll focus on 4 today. So the first is asset ownership. This is probably very easy to understand. This is just where we have a token that represents a one-to-one claim on some off-chain asset. So that could be a gold bar in a vault in Singapore. It could be a property unit. Really anything you can imagine as a real-world asset can be represented by a token. The next is value distribution. This is somewhat analogous to equity and dividends. So this is where there's some kind of surplus cash, perhaps from a platform with underlying real-world assets, and then the surplus cash or surplus economic value is distributed via direct distribution, such as a dividend, a buyback and burn. There's various different mechanisms of doing this. Third is governance or voting rights. So the idea here is that token holders have some sort of decision-making or voting power over the on-chain environment, possibly also directing kind of off-chain actions as well. Fourth and finally is membership functionality. So this is where we have a platform or a business with RWAs underneath, and the membership token, if you hold this token, you might get different economic benefits, such as discount on fees, preferential access to resources that are constrained, or features. There are several other token functionalities which are less relevant to RWA projects, such as payments and service provisioning. If you want to learn more about this framework, come and find me later on, but we won't have time to cover that today. So a few notes on value accrual and liquidity. So there's a few ways that value can come from these real-world assets into tokens. First is just the direct entitlement or a dividend. This is where the smart contract sweeps distributable cash to holders. That can be done algorithmically or on a more kind of ad hoc basis. Membership benefits, so as mentioned on the previous slide, if you hold a token, you might get certain economic benefits such as discounted fees, etc. And this is another way to drive value to the underlying token. Third is buybacks, so analogous to stock buybacks. You can conduct buybacks with surplus cash. You then have the option to either lock those tokens for future economic use, or you can just burn them, so a permanent reduction in supply. And then collateral stake is another way that tokens in this sector can accrue value. So for instance, you can have a junior tranche of tokens whereby they are the first tokens to recollateralize a system in a result of under-collateralization, and you might receive a higher yield for taking on that risk. So obviously that requires a level of due diligence from the token holder, but they are in theory compensated for that. So 2 brief notes on tokens in relation to equity and liquidity. So when it comes to liquidity, you need to provide a credible secondary market. This allows investors to exit, and it lowers any kind of liquidity premium you're paying. And then, candidly, this is a problem that projects run into all the time. And so if you are considering a token, whether you're an RWA project or otherwise, I would just emphasize to clearly delineate and define the rights that go to equity holders versus token holders. This is an exercise you really should be conducting at the beginning of any kind of design work, because if you don't get it right early on, then it can lead to governance tensions later on, as well as disputes. So a few notes on governance. Governance is a huge topic. It's an unsolved problem in the world. It's definitely an unsolved problem in crypto. So we'll attempt to cover a few key points briefly, but governance is a very large topic in and of itself. So in general, RWA projects are going to have a hybrid governance framework. So that's going to consist of these real-world legal entities, which will have their own set of governance decisions, as well as some kind of on-chain economic environment, whereby token holders may or may not have some degree of voting rights. And so hybrid frameworks are generally what we see here. So you may have trustees or directors who have to execute decisions off-chain, and you need some kind of mechanism to communicate any decision-making on-chain to these off-chain directors. or other entities. In general, when it comes to governance frameworks, I would just emphasize progressive decentralization. So starting lean, keeping things lean, and then widening voting and decentralization remit over time as you can. You need some kind of bridge to communicate and execute decisions from this on-chain blockchain environment to the real-world entities. And so that can be through legal documents or otherwise. And then multi-tier safeguards. So again, this kind of applies to all projects, but particularly to RWA projects. So to protect against governance issues, always kind of emphasize use of quorums, minority veto rules, the use of expert bodies or even technocratic bodies such as councils or sub-DAOs. This is a roundabout way of saying the kind of standard crypto one token, one vote model usually doesn't apply well to projects, and this is especially true of RWA projects. A few other tools to briefly mention. So we talked earlier about how you can use dynamic collateral ratios. This is particularly true of kind of DeFi lending protocols that integrate with RWAs. So projects like Centrifuge and I think Maple may use mechanisms like this, but you're essentially using oracles and other mechanisms to assess asset quality off-chain and then adjust collateral ratios on-chain. Lockup schedule, this only applies if you have a native token, whether that's a value distribution token or a governance token. So you basically just want to manage your supply schedule such that you don't flood the market with supply of new tokens until there's kind of requisite demand to absorb it. And then liquidity programs, whether you're going to list the token on decentralized or centralized exchanges, then having some kind of liquidity strategy, whether that means working with market makers or otherwise, is another kind of tool in the toolbox to be thinking about. Okay, so just wrapping up here with some key takeaways. First of all, get your incentives designed properly and do this first before encoding anything into software. You can always change rules later on, but it's a bit of a headache to put it mildly. So getting someone in-house to do your design work or working with someone out-house or even just adopting best practices as you best see fit, I would always kind of emphasize that. Make any kind of rights enforceable. So this is especially true with RWA projects. You have these off-chain assets, you have these off-chain entities, and if you're going to have on-chain economic rights for your native token, then you have to have some way to make sure that those rights are actually enforceable. And then show the value path. So make sure that the rights associated with your equity and associated with your token are clearly mapped from day one. And if that's going to be on some kind of roadmap, then again, just kind of document how those rights will unfold over time. So thank you for listening. I'll be around the rest of the day. There's links to both our companies, design agency on the left, token architecture, research analytics for investors on the right, Just Cryptoeconomics. Thank you very much.